I'm a fence builder who answers calls no one else will. When Elaine called about a sagging pasture gate, I figured it was just another rotted post. Her twin 6-year-old daughters watched me from the porch, whispering behind cupped hands. Mama polished her ring for you. I froze, my grip slipping on the post hole digger. I came to mend a broken latch, but I'd walked into a doorway a family had been polishing for a long time. My name is Elias Stone. I'm not the kind of man people wait for. I'm the guy you call when a gate won't swing right, when a post rots out, when a job is too dirty or too far or too lonely for anyone else. Elaine's place was no different on the listing, just another sagging hinge, another widow's fence line to mend while the sun beat down. But those twin girls on the porch weren't just being quiet. They were two small sentinels holding a secret their mother had been shaping for 3 years. What I didn't know yet was that this gate was just the first step into a story that began long before I ever picked up the phone. Elaine's property sat at the end of a washed-out gravel road that GPS had given up on 3 miles back. The mailbox leaned like a drunk against a rotted post. The house itself was a white 2-story farmhouse with peeling paint and a wraparound porch that sagged in the middle like an old horse. The gate she'd called about stood at the south pasture, a 12-foot steel tube frame that had pulled loose from its top hinge and now dragged a deep scar through the dirt every time the wind caught it. Simple job. Dig out the old post, set a new one in concrete, rehang the gate, bill her for the hardware. I'd done it 1,000 times. I parked my truck by the barn and grabbed the post hole digger. That's when I first saw the twins. They were sitting side by side on the porch swing, identical in every way, same brown curls, same faded sundresses, same bare feet swinging in perfect time. They couldn't have been more than 6 years old. They didn't wave, didn't smile. They just watched me with a stillness that didn't belong on children's faces, their heads tilting at the same angle as I unloaded my tools. I nodded once. They didn't nod back. Instead, they cupped their hands over each other's ears and began whispering in a rapid, urgent rhythm, their eyes never leaving me. The hair on my arm stood up, and I told myself it was just the October chill. I dug the new post hole 4 feet deep, through hardpan that fought me every inch. The work was loud and brutal, the digger's handles slamming against packed earth, but between each thrust I caught fragments of their voices floating through the screen door. "That's him." "Are you sure?" "Mama said he'd come." I drove the digger harder, trying to drown them out. Men who do my kind of work learn to ignore the noises of other people's houses, creaking floors, distant arguments, even whispers. But these whispers had a shape, a direction. They were about me. I set the new pressure-treated post, leveled it, and poured the concrete. The gate swung true when I tested it, silent and smooth on new hinges. A good job. I was wiping the grease from my hands when the screen door opened and Elaine stepped onto the porch. She was tall and thin, with dark hair pulled back in a hasty knot and eyes that had learned to look down before looking up. She carried a pitcher of sweet tea and 2 glasses on a wooden tray, her knuckles white around the handles. She didn't meet my gaze. She set the tray on the porch rail and poured with a steadiness that seemed practiced, deliberate, like she'd rehearsed this moment a dozen times. "Thank you for coming so quick," she said, her voice too even. "Most folks won't drive this far out." "Gate's fixed," I said. "Should hold another 20 years. She handed me a glass. Her fingers brushed mine and she pulled back fast, color rising in her cheeks. I drank. The tea was cold and sweet and cut the dust in my throat. We stood there in a silence that felt heavy, the kind that presses on your ears before a storm. Behind her, the twins had stopped whispering and were now staring at me with identical expressions of intense concentration, like I was a math problem they were solving together. The older stories about this family came back to me then. I'd heard bits and pieces in town, that Elaine's husband, Thomas, had been killed by an IED outside Kandahar 3 years ago, that she'd never remarried, that she kept to herself and raised those girls alone on a sergeant's pension and whatever she could sell from the garden. Nobody spoke ill of her. They just spoke in the low tones people reserve for a wound that hasn't closed. "Your husband," I said carefully. "I remember hearing I'm sorry." She nodded once, a tight movement. 3 years last August." She looked toward the twins. "They don't remember him much. They were only 3 when he deployed, but they know he's not coming back." I didn't know what to say to that, so I finished my tea and set the glass on the tray. I turned to leave. That's when one of the twins, the one on the left, stood up on the swing and spoke in a high, clear voice. "Mama polished her ring for you." I stopped. The words hung in the air between us. Elaine's face went pale, then red. She turned sharply toward the girl, but the other twin was already nodding, adding, "She took it out of the drawer. She shined it every night this week. She said the man who came to fix the gate was the one who would stay." Elaine's hands were shaking. She wouldn't look at me. I should have walked to my truck. I should have thanked her for the tea and driven away and never thought about this place again. But something held me there, not the words themselves, but the way Elaine's shoulders had hunched forward like a woman bracing for a blow. This wasn't a trick. It wasn't a game. It was a hope so desperate it had been whispered to children in the dark for weeks, and it had finally spilled out onto a dusty porch in front of a stranger with grease on his hands. The ring. That was the detail that lodged in my brain. I found myself asking, "Your wedding band?" Elaine's voice was barely audible. "It's been in a drawer since the funeral. I couldn't look at it." She paused, then made herself continue. "Last month I started wearing it again. At night mostly, after the girls were asleep, I'd sit by the window and, I don't know, I'd talk to Thomas, ask him what to do." She finally lifted her eyes to mine, and they were wet but fierce. "I told him the fence was breaking down and the garden was failing, and I was so tired of being alone. I asked him to send someone who would stay, not someone to fix a gate, someone to fix this." She gestured at the house, the porch, the twins, and herself. "I'd built fences my whole adult life. I understood posts and concrete and the pull of gravity on a steel gate. I didn't understand a dead soldier sending a handyman to answer his widow's prayer, but I understood loneliness. I understood what it felt like to go home to an empty house every night, to cook a meal for one, to hear your own voice only when you talk to yourself. I recognized the same hollow silence in Elaine that I'd been filling with work and sweat and miles of barbed wire for 15 years. The twins were still watching. The one who'd spoken first slipped off the swing and walked toward me, her bare feet silent on the porch boards. She stopped an arm's length away and looked up. "Are you staying?" she asked. I looked at Elaine. She looked back at me with a terror that was almost hope, her fingers clasped so tightly around her left hand that I could see the pale band of skin where the ring would sit. And I realized with a cold clarity that fixing this gate had never been a random job. Elaine had called 3 different handymen before me. All 3 had said no. She'd saved my number for last, and then she'd waited. Waited with a polished ring and 2 watchful daughters, and a story she'd already told herself so many times it had become a truth she was ready to live. I opened my mouth to answer. That's when I saw the photograph sitting on the windowsill behind her, a man in uniform, staring out at me with steady eyes that looked exactly like his daughter's, and something ancient and possessive flickered in the glass of the frame. The gate wasn't just a gate. I hadn't been called out here by chance. And whatever force had guided Elaine's hand to my number, it wasn't finished with either of us yet. I didn't answer the girl, not yet. The photograph held my eyes. Thomas in his dress blues, the flag behind him, that steady gaze that seemed to reach through the glass and settle on my skin like a hand. The flicker I'd seen was gone now, just a reflection of porch light off the pane, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something in that frame had moved. Not the picture, the space around it, the air itself. Elaine saw me staring. She turned, followed my line of sight to the windowsill, and her face tightened. "That's Thomas," she said, as if I needed the confirmation. "His official portrait, the one they gave us at the funeral." She stepped closer to the window, her voice dropping. "Sometimes I think he's still watching, from wherever he is. The girls say he talks to them at night." The twins were quiet now, both standing at attention like small soldiers awaiting orders. The one who'd asked the question, the bolder one, I'd learned her name was Lily, tugged at my sleeve. "Daddy said you'd come," she repeated, louder this time. "He said the man with the truck and the tools would fix the gate and then fix Mama's heart." "Lily, that's enough." Elaine's voice cracked. She took her daughter by the shoulders and guided her back toward the swing, but the other twin, Emma, identical except for a small freckle under her left eye, remained fixed on me. "It's true," Emma whispered. "He comes at night and stands by our bed. He doesn't scare us. He just tells us things. He said Mama was going to call you for a long time, but she was too afraid. He said we had to help her be brave." I felt a cold line trace down my spine. Not the cold of fear exactly, but the cold of recognition. The same way a man feels when he steps into a barn he's never entered and somehow knows where the light switch is. I'd been on this property for less than 2 hours, and already the boundaries between coincidence and something older were dissolving under my feet. Elaine sank into the porch rocker. Her hands covered her face, and for a long moment she said nothing. I stayed standing, the empty tea glass still sweating in my hand. The sun had dropped below the tree line, staining the sky a bruised purple. From the pasture, the new gate creaked once, a settling sound, not a complaint, and then fell silent. "I need to tell you something," Elaine said finally, pulling her hands away. Her eyes were red but dry. "I need you to understand why I called you, not the other men, you specifically." I set the glass down and leaned against the porch rail. "I'm listening." She took a breath. "3 months after Thomas died, I had a dream. I was standing in this very yard, right there by the gate, the one you just fixed, and I was holding his wedding ring. Not mine, his. I'd buried it with him. I saw it go into the casket, but in the dream I was holding it and it was warm like he'd just taken it off. And he was standing next to me, not like a ghost, but solid, real, the way he looked the morning he deployed. He pointed down the road and said, 'When the gate falls, he'll come. Wait for him.'" She paused, watching my reaction. I kept my face still. I've heard a lot of stories from a lot of people in my years working alone on remote farms, stories of visitations, of signs, of messages from the dead. Most of them were just grief wearing a mask, but Elaine's eyes didn't have the feverish quality of someone who'd lost her grip. She looked like a woman who'd been handed a map she didn't ask for and was trying to read it without any landmarks. "I wrote it off," she continued. "Grief does things to the mind. But then 1 year later I had the exact same dream. Same gate, same ring, same words. I still ignored it. I told myself it was just my brain replaying what I wanted to hear. But then the gate actually broke. 3 months ago, after a storm, the top hinge pulled free. I went out there and looked at it, and I heard his voice so clearly, not in my head but in the air, saying, 'Now.'" She looked toward the gate, now straight and true on its new hinges. "I found your number in an old county directory from when you fixed the fence at the Henderson place. That was 7 years ago. I didn't even know if you were still in business. But I called and you answered and you said you could come out that same week. Then you showed up on a Thursday just like in the dream. And the girls," she gestured toward the twins, "they'd been telling me for weeks that their father had told them a man was coming, a man who would stay. I never said a word to them about the dream. Never. I was quiet. I've spent my life solving problems with my hands, broken posts, rusted hinges, sections of woven wire that won't hold tension. I don't traffic in the supernatural. But you don't work on old land as long as I have without learning that some places hold onto things, and some promises outlive the people who made them." Before I could respond, the smaller twin, Emma, slipped away from her sister and walked to the windowsill. Didn't touch the photograph. She just stood on her toes and looked at it, her face level with her father's. "He's not mad," she announced, in a tone so matter-of-fact it made the hairs on my arms rise again. "He says you're supposed to be scared. That's okay. He was scared too before." Elaine stiffened. "Before what, baby? Before he went away. He says he was scared he wouldn't come back, but he's not scared now. He wants you to know that." Emma turned to me. "He wants you to know you're not a mistake. He picked you." I opened my mouth, but no words came. For the first time in 30 years of running my own business, I didn't know what service I was supposed to provide. Fix the gate, done. Fix a family, that wasn't in my job description. But standing there on that sagging porch, with the twilight settling over the fields and two small girls looking at me like I was the answer to a prayer they'd learned before they could read, I felt the ground of my own certainty start to shift. "Ain't," I said, keeping my voice low. "I'm just a fence builder. I'm not whatever your dream thinks I am. I've got no special gifts. I'm not a replacement for a man you lost. I can't be that." Tears finally spilled over her cheeks. "I know. I'm not asking you to be Thomas. I'm just asking you to understand why I called. Why I've been polishing this ring every night for a month, even though I don't know if I have the right to wear it anymore. Why I asked a dead man to send me someone who wouldn't run." She held out her left hand. The skin was bare, but there was a faint tan line where the ring had sat for years before she'd taken it off. "I took it off the day they told me he was gone. I put it in a drawer and I locked it. But 2 weeks ago, I opened that drawer and I put it on again and it felt warm, just like in the dream. And I knew you were coming. I looked at the tan line. I looked at the gate. I looked at the photograph in the window, and for just a second I could have sworn the soldier's expression had shifted, not a smile, but something softer. Permission, maybe, or a challenge. Then the moment shattered. Headlights cut through the dusk, bouncing up the rutted drive. An engine growled something heavy, a diesel and a black pickup with a rusted grille slammed to a stop 20 yards from my truck. The door opened before the engine died, and a man stepped out. He was built like a linebacker gone to seed, with a thick neck and a jaw that looked like it had been broken and set by someone who didn't care much about symmetry. He wore a flannel shirt and work boots crusted with mud, and he moved with the coiled energy of a man who was used to getting his way through volume. "Elaine," he shouted, striding toward the porch. "Who's this?" "Another handyman you called out. I told you to stop dragging strangers onto this property." The twins shrank back. Emma grabbed Lily's hand and pulled her behind the rocker. Elaine stood up, her face draining of color. "Darren," she said, her voice tight. "This isn't your concern." Darren, Thomas's brother. I'd heard the name before, a developer who'd been buying up failing farms in the county and flipping them for housing tracts. He tried to buy out Elaine's land after Thomas died, offering a fraction of the value, and when she'd refused, he'd turned nasty. I hadn't known he'd been showing up in person. "Everything on this land is my concern," Darren said, stopping at the base of the porch steps. His eyes locked onto me. "You the one been sniffing around my brother's widow. Let me guess, she told you some sob story, offered you tea, maybe a little more, and now you're thinking you can slide right in where a real man used to stand." I stepped forward. "I'm here to fix a gate." Darren laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Sure you are. That's what the last one said, and the one before that. They all come to fix something, and then they come around again with flowers. I've been watching. Nobody's taking advantage of my brother's family while I'm still breathing." Elaine's voice rose. "You've been scaring them off. The handymen I called before, you ran them away, didn't you?" Darren shrugged, unrepentant. "I did what had to be done. You think I'm going to let some drifter waltz in here and take what Thomas built? This land belongs to our family. If you can't manage it, sell it to me and I'll take care of it. But I won't have you turning my brother's house into some kind of romance for hire." "She's not selling." I said it flat, without heat. "And I'm not leaving until the concrete sets. After that, it's her call." Darren took one step up. His eyes narrowed. "You know who I am. I've got half the county board in my pocket. One call and your business permit gets flagged. You want to test that?" I held his gaze. "Test it." The air crackled. The twins started crying softly behind the chair. Elaine put herself between Darren and the girls. "Please just go. I'll call the sheriff if I have to." Darren's jaw worked. For a second I thought he might swing. Instead, he pointed a finger at me. "You've got 5 minutes to be off this property. After that, we do things my way." He turned and stalked back to his truck, kicking up gravel as he roared away, his taillights vanishing into the dark like two angry eyes. Elaine collapsed against the porch railing, her whole body shaking. The twins huddled against her legs. I stood watching the road where the taillights had disappeared, and a new understanding settled over me. This wasn't just about a gate. It wasn't even just about a lonely widow and a dead husband's wish. There was money involved, land, development rights, a brother who saw his inheritance slipping away. And I had just stepped directly into the middle of it. I knelt down so I was eye level with the twins. "Lily, Emma," I said quietly, "what else did your daddy tell you about the man who was coming?" Lily wiped her nose on her sleeve. "He said the bad man would try to scare him away, but the good man would stay anyway." Emma nodded, her voice trembling. "He said you'd be the one who doesn't run. He said you'd protect us." I looked up at Elaine. Her face was still wet, but her eyes held a desperate question. The photograph in the window hadn't moved again. But in the silence after Darren's departure, I heard something I couldn't explain, a low creak from the gate, as if someone had just opened it and walked through. When I turned to look, the gate was closed. The pasture beyond was empty, but the distinct impression of a figure, a tall, broad-shouldered shadow, lingered at the corner of my vision, just at the edge of the tree line. By the time I turned my head fully, it was gone. I knew then that I wasn't going to leave at the 5-minute mark. Something had been set in motion long before I arrived, and walking away now would be like trying to stop a river with my hands. I fixed a broken latch. I'd stumbled into a doorway, and whatever was on the other side of that door wasn't done with me yet. I didn't leave in 5 minutes. I didn't leave in an hour. By the time full dark had settled over the farm, I was still sitting on the porch step, a cold mug of coffee in my hands that Elaine had wordlessly pressed into them after Darren's taillights disappeared. She put the twins to bed with whispered reassurances and a lullaby I didn't recognize, her voice carrying through the screen door thin and fragile. When she came back out, she sat beside me on the step, not close, but closer than before, and for a long time neither of us spoke. The yard was a bowl of silence. Even the crickets seemed to be waiting. After a while I said, "He's going to come back." Elaine nodded, her profile pale in the moonlight. "He's been trying to get this land since the day they handed me the flag at the funeral. He said Thomas promised it to him. There's no paperwork, no will, nothing. But he keeps saying he'll prove it. He's got lawyers. He knows people at the county assessor's office. Last month he filed a claim that Thomas had an oral agreement with him that the land was meant to stay in the bloodline, not with an outsider." "An outsider," I repeated. "You're his brother's widow." "I'm not a Morris, not anymore," he says. "When Thomas died, my connection to the family died with him. He told me that at the wake." Her voice stayed steady, but her hands were shaking. "He said my only value was the land, and if I was smart, I'd take his offer and move back to wherever I came from." I asked the question that had been forming since Darren's truck first appeared. "Was there ever an offer, a real one?" She let out a bitter laugh. $20,000 for 80 acres of prime pasture, a working well, a 4-bedroom house, and a barn full of equipment. He said he was being generous. I told him to get off my property. I set my mug down. He's not going to accept no. A man who shows up at night with that kind of rage already has a plan. He's been working on this for 3 years. You're the only thing standing between him and a piece of land he thinks he deserves. That makes you a target. And now you," she said quietly, "you're a target too. You stood up to him. He won't forget that." I thought about Darren's connections, the county board, the assessor's office. A man like that could make life very difficult for a one-man fence-building operation. But that concern felt distant compared to what I'd seen earlier. "I'm more worried about what he might do to the farm, to you, to the girls." Elaine's face tightened. "He wouldn't hurt the children, they're his nieces." He was about to come up those stairs. "If I hadn't been here, what would he have done?" She had no answer. The next morning I woke in my truck. I'd insisted on staying in the cab overnight, not in the house. Elaine's reputation had already been shredded enough, and I wasn't going to add fuel to Darren's rumors. I stretched the kinks out of my back and watched the sun rise over the pasture. The gate was a dark rectangle against the pink sky, still hanging true. The shadow I'd glimpsed at the tree line was gone, replaced by the ordinary shape of an old oak. But when I walked out to check the concrete, I found something that drained the warmth from the morning. Footprints. Large, deep, and recent, pressed into the soft dirt around the gate post, leading from the tree line directly to the spot where I'd set the post, then back again. A man's prints by the size, and beside them smaller prints that looked like a child's bare feet. I followed them with my eyes to the base of the oak, where the dirt was scuffed in a pattern that looked like someone had stood there for a long time, facing the house. The twins' footprints. This was where they'd been standing when I saw the shadow. But the larger prints hadn't been there yesterday. They were fresh, made overnight while I slept 50 yards away. I knelt and pressed my fingers into one of the prints. The dirt was cold but not frozen. No dew had collected inside. They'd been made within the last hour. The screen door banged and Emma came tearing across the yard in her bare feet, her nightgown trailing in the wet grass. "Mr. Elias, Mr. Elias, Mama says come quick. There's a man in the kitchen." I was running before she finished the sentence. I burst through the back door with a piece of 2x4 I'd grabbed from the truck bed, heart hammering. Elaine stood at the kitchen table, one hand covering her mouth, the other holding a letter. She was alone. "There's no one here," she said, voice strange. But someone was. The back door was wide open when I came down. "Nothing's missing, just this." She held out the letter. It was written on yellow legal paper, the kind you buy at any drugstore, but the handwriting was what froze me in place. I'd seen that handwriting before on the gate job order Elaine had mailed me. The same neat, upright script, but this wasn't Elaine's writing. It was bolder, loops wider with a soldier's precision. And the ink was still damp. I read it aloud. Elaine, I told you the gate was the signal. He came. Don't send him away. Darren will try to break what you're building. He's already broken more than you know. Look in the north corner of the hay barn under the loose floorboard. Trust the man with the scar. I touched my own face without thinking. I have no scar. But then I realized the narrator in the original had a scar. My mind snagged on that detail, but the letter's words were pressing harder. Has Thomas's handwriting changed since he died? Do you recognize this? Elaine's face was white. It's his hand. I'd know it anywhere. But Thomas didn't write about loose floorboards. Thomas didn't leave messages in the kitchen. Thomas is dead. Lily appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. Daddy was here, she said, as if statting the weather. He came in and told me to go back to sleep. He said the bad man was coming again and we had to be brave. Emma nodded vigorously. He put the paper on the table. He kissed Mama's head. Then he went out the back door and walked toward the barn. She pointed. He's not there now. He went away again. I exchanged a look with Elaine. Her terror was giving way to something else, a desperate, fragile hope. The hay barn, she said. The north corner. I've never looked under any floorboards. Thomas built that barn himself before we were married. We went together. I carried a crowbar from my truck. The hay barn was old but solid, with a packed dirt floor and stacks of moldering hay bales that hadn't been moved in years. In the north corner, beneath a rotted tarp, I found a single wide plank that rang hollow when I tapped it. I wedged the crowbar under the edge, and Elaine held a flashlight as I pried it up. Underneath was a metal box, the size of a shoebox, locked with a small padlock. We cut the lock with my bolt cutters. Inside, I found documents that turned everything sideways. The first was a notarized deed, dated 6 months before Thomas deployed, transferring full ownership of the 80-acre farm to Elaine Morris with an ironclad survivorship clause. No co-owner, no brother. The second was a life insurance policy, not the military one Elaine had already received, but a private policy worth $250,000, nomming Elaine as sole beneficiary. She'd never known it existed. But the third document was the bomb. It was a letter, handwritten in the same bold script, addressed to Elaine, dated the night before Thomas shipped out. I handed it to her. She read it silently at first, then aloud, her voice cracking. My dearest Elaine, if you're reading this, I didn't come home. I need you to know some things. Darren has been trying to take this land since before we were married. He forged my signature on a loan document 3 years ago, using this farm as collateral. I found out but never told you because I didn't want to worry you. I fixed it quietly with the bank. But he doesn't know I fixed it. He still thinks he can call that loan in and take everything. I'm leaving this letter and these documents here, hidden, because I know he'll come for you after I'm gone. The gate is a sign when it breaks and a man comes to fix it. A man who doesn't run, show him this box. Trust him. I've been praying for someone I can trust to stand beside you. If you're reading this, my prayers were answered. I love you. I love the girls. I'm sorry I couldn't stay. Thomas. Elaine collapsed against me, sobbing, the letter crushed between us. I held her there in the dusty barn, the morning light slanting through the cracks in the walls, and I felt the weight of a dead man's trust settle onto my shoulders like a mantle. This wasn't a lonely widow's fantasy. This was a carefully constructed plan, set in motion years ago, waiting for the right moment to activate. But it also meant Darren was more dangerous than I'd thought. Forgery, fraud, attempted theft of a soldier's property. If that loan document still existed anywhere and Darren believed it gave him leverage, he'd stop at nothing to keep it from coming to light. I pulled back gently and looked at Elaine. We need to go to the county courthouse, right now. We need to file these documents before Darren finds out we have them. She wiped her face. What about the gate, the girls, the farm? The gate's solid. The girls can stay with a neighbor, and the farm. I looked at the deed, the insurance policy, the letter. Thomas already protected the farm, we just have to enforce it. We drove into town that afternoon. But the moment we stepped into the county recorder's office, the clerk looked up with a pinched expression and said, "Mrs. Morris, I was just about to call you. A lien was filed this morning against your property." A Mr. Darren Morris claims you owe him $30,000 for services rendered to the estate. He's also filed an emergency motion to freeze the property pending an ownership hearing. Elaine's hands clenched. I've never owed him a cent. He's lying. The clerk shrugged. The motion's already been granted. I'm sorry, but I can't process any deed changes or policy claims until the hearing. That's 2 weeks from now. 2 weeks. Darren had made his move before we could, and now the clock was ticking. We left the courthouse and got into my truck. Elaine was staring straight ahead, her jaw set. He thinks he can bury us in paper, she said, but he doesn't know what we found. I started the engine. He doesn't know we have Thomas's original will and the policy, but he's got the local system on his side. We need allies, people who knew Thomas, people who can't be bought. Elaine turned to me. Father Bell at the church, Thomas's old platoon sergeant, the VFW post. If we can get enough people to testify that Darren is lying, we might have a chance. I nodded. Then that's where we start, but we also need to keep you and the girls safe. Darren's not just a liar, he's shown up at your house angry and alone. If he finds out we're building a case. I know. Her voice was steady, but her eyes flicked to the side mirror, scanning the street. He'll come. That night I stayed in the house. I didn't care about gossip anymore. I moved my truck behind the barn so it couldn't be seen from the road. Elaine locked every door and window. The twins slept in her room, the metal box with Thomas's documents under the bed. At 2 in the morning, I woke to the sound of breaking glass. A bottle shattered against the porch. Then another. The sharp chemical smell of gasoline cut through the night air. Through the window, I saw a flicker of orange light catch on the wooden railing, and I was on my feet before the flames had time to spread. I grabbed the fire extinguisher from the kitchen and kicked open the front door. 2 more bottles, beer bottles stuffed with rags, arched out of the dark and crashed onto the porch roof. The flames licked up the dry wood like a living thing. I sprayed until the extinguisher was empty, then tackled a bucket of water from the rain barrel. Behind me, Elaine was on the phone with the fire department, her voice sharp and terrified. From the darkness beyond the yard, an engine gunned. Headlights flared. Darren's black pickup peeled away, fishtailing on the gravel, but before it vanished, a single voice shouted back, clear as a bell. You've got 2 weeks, handyman, then I take everything. I stood on the smoldering porch, the fire extinguisher empty in my hands, the acrid taste of smoke coating my mouth. The message was no longer subtle. Darren had escalated from threats to arson, and if we didn't find a way to stop him before the hearing, he'd escalate further. I turned to Elaine. She was white-faced but not broken. She held the phone in one hand and the metal box in the other, clutching it to her chest like a shield. The girls were safe, huddled behind her in the hallway, their eyes huge. This isn't about the land anymore, I said, my voice hoarse. It's about the truth, and the truth is in that box. We've got 14 days to make sure it sees the light of day, and that no one can silence us before it does. I looked out at the gate, still solid against the night sky, and I felt the presence I'd sensed before, not a ghost, not a shadow, but a quiet certainty. Thomas had prepared for this battle years ago. He'd left a trail of breadcrumbs leading exactly to this moment, and I was the stranger he'd chosen to walk it with his family. What I didn't know yet was that Darren had one more card to play, something even Thomas hadn't anticipated. And when I discovered it, the whole foundation of this fight would shift beneath our feet. The fire left scorch marks on the porch that we couldn't scrub out. Every morning for the next 3 days, I woke before dawn and walked the perimeter with a flashlight, checking for fresh tire tracks, for footprints, for any sign that Darren had come back. The sheriff had taken our report and promised to look into it, but in a county where Darren played golf with the mayor and donated to every re-election campaign, I knew what that meant. We were on our own. On the 4th day, a silver sedan pulled into the drive. Not Darren, a woman in her 60s with iron-gray hair and a briefcase. She stepped out and introduced herself as Margaret Cole, a retired judge who'd once presided over the county probate court. I heard about your situation from Father Bell, she said, accepting a cup of coffee on the damaged porch. I've also heard about Darren Morris for years. I've been waiting for someone to finally stand up to him. She opened her briefcase and spread documents across the porch table. The forgery that Thomas had mentioned in his letter, the loan document with his falsified signature. She'd found a copy of it in old court files. Darren filed this as evidence in a property dispute 6 years ago, she said, tapping the paper. He claimed Thomas owed him $40,000. The bank rejected it because the signature didn't match, but no one ever pursued charges. Thomas didn't want the family scandal. He just paid the debt himself and buried it. Elaine stared at the signature. That's not his handwriting. The T is all wrong. I know. I've compared it to his military records. It's a clumsy forgery. If we can get a handwriting expert to testify, we can prove fraud. And if we can prove fraud, Darren's lien and his entire case collapses. Margaret looked at me. But he's not going to let that happen without a fight. He's already spreading rumors that you're living here, that you and Elaine are conspiring to steal the land from the Morris family. He's painting you as a drifter who seduced a vulnerable widow. I'm not a drifter. I've got a business, a record, a reputation. A reputation that can be destroyed overnight. All he needs is one accusation, theft, assault, anything. You need to be careful. That warning proved prophetic 2 days later. I was in town buying supplies when a sheriff's deputy pulled me over. Mr. Stone, we've had a complaint. Darren Morris says you threatened him with a weapon on the night of the fire. He's willing to press charges unless you agree to leave the county. I kept my hands on the wheel. I never threatened him. He's the one who threw firebombs at a house with children inside. The deputy was young and uncomfortable. I'm just relaying the message. You might want to lawyer up. I didn't have a lawyer, but Margaret Cole, it turned out, had a nephew who practiced criminal defense. By that evening, I had representation, and the deputy's threat was on record as witness tampering. The net was tightening around Darren, but he didn't know it yet. He thought he was winning. The hearing was set for Monday, August 19th, 14 days after the fire. In those 2 weeks, we built a coalition. Father Bell brought a dozen parishioners who'd known Thomas since he was a boy. The VFW post commander, a man named Sergeant First Class Harold Reeves, arrived with a binder full of letters Thomas had written from Afghanistan, letters that mentioned his fears about Darren, his determination to protect Elaine, his love for his daughters. The insurance company confirmed the private policy was valid and unclaimed. The county assessor, pressured by Margaret's reputation, agreed to review the original loan forgery. But Darren wasn't idle. He hired a lawyer from the city, a slick man in an expensive suit who immediately filed a motion to exclude Thomas's letter as hearsay. He subpoenaed my business records, looking for any blemish he could use. He even produced a witness, a former client of mine who claimed I'd overcharged her for a fence repair 5 years ago. The accusation was false, but it made the local paper. For a few days, I could feel the town's opinion shifting. People I'd known for years crossed the street when they saw me coming. Elaine held steady. Every night after the girls were asleep, we sat on the repaired porch and talked about Thomas not as a ghost, but as a man. She told me about their first date, a county fair where he'd won her a stuffed bear. She told me about the day he proposed, kneeling in the very pasture where the gate now hung. She told me about the morning he deployed, how he'd kissed each twin on the forehead and promised to come home. The ring she'd been polishing wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was a tether to a life that had been stolen from her. And the fact that she'd opened that drawer again meant she was ready to start living. On the night before the hearing, I found Emma standing alone by the gate. She was in her nightgown, barefoot, her small hand resting on the steel tube. "He's here," she said simply. "Daddy says not to be scared tomorrow. He says the truth is bigger than the lies." I knelt beside her. "Does he say anything else?" She smiled, a tiny, secret smile. "He says thank you for staying." I looked out into the dark pasture. The shadow I'd glimpsed before was there again, not menacing, just present, a deeper darkness against the tree line. I nodded once, and the shadow seemed to nod back. Then it was gone, and Emma took my hand and led me back to the house. The hearing was held in the county courthouse, a squat brick building with a cracked foundation and a courtroom that smelled of old wood and lost hopes. Judge Fernando Reyes presided, a stern man with a reputation for fairness. Darren sat at the plaintiff's table with his fancy lawyer. Elaine and I sat with Margaret Cole and our attorney. In the gallery, Father Bell, Sergeant Reeves, and 24 neighbors filled every bench. Rosa, Elaine's closest friend from the market, clutched a handkerchief in the front row. Darren's lawyer went first. He argued that Thomas had intended the land to stay in the Morris bloodline, that Elaine had no right to remain after her husband's death, that her cohabitation with a stranger proved moral unfitness. He presented the forged loan document as evidence of a pre-existing debt. He painted Elaine as a schemer and me as an opportunist. By the time he finished, the room was murmuring with unease. Then Margaret stood. She was 73 years old, and her voice filled the courtroom without a microphone. She presented the notarized deed with the survivorship clause. She presented the life insurance policy. She presented the letter from Thomas, and when Darren's lawyer objected, she produced a sworn affidavit from a handwriting expert confirming that every word matched Thomas's known hand. She presented the original bank records showing that Thomas had repaid the alleged debt himself, and that the signature on Darren's loan document was a forgery. "I have one more piece of evidence," Margaret said, and the room went still. She held up a sealed envelope. "This arrived at my office yesterday. It's a letter from Mr. Darren Morris's former secretary, a woman named Patricia Hume, who worked for him from 2014 to 2018. In it, she states under oath that she witnessed Mr. Morris forge his brother's signature on multiple documents, including the loan agreement presented here today. She also states that she was fired when she threatened to report him." The courtroom erupted. Darren shot to his feet, his face crimson. "That's a lie. She's a disgruntled employee. Judge Reyes slammed his gavel. "Mr. Morris, sit down or I'll have you removed." The next hour was a cascade of testimony. Sergeant Reeves read from Thomas's letters about Darren's threats. The county assessor confirmed the deed's validity. The insurance company confirmed the policy. And finally, Elaine herself took the stand. She wore Thomas's ring on her left hand, the one she'd been polishing for a month. She spoke quietly but firmly, telling the court about the night the gate broke, the dream she'd had, the way her daughters had known before she did that the right man had arrived. She told them about the fire, about the threats, about the fear that had lived in her house for 3 years. And then she said something I'll never forget. "I didn't ask for any of this. I didn't ask to lose my husband. I didn't ask for his brother to try to steal everything Thomas left us, but Thomas prepared for this. He knew Darren would come and he left a trail for me to follow. All I did was follow it. And at the end of that trail, I found a man who stayed when every other man ran. That's not a scandal, Your Honor. That's a miracle." The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Even Darren's lawyer stopped shuffling papers. Judge Reyes removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "This court has heard enough. The evidence is overwhelming. The deed is valid. The insurance belongs to Mrs. Morris. The allegation of forgery against Mr. Darren Morris will be referred to the district attorney for criminal investigation. The lien is void. The emergency freeze on the property is lifted effective immediately." He looked directly at Darren. "Mr. Morris, you came to this court seeking justice, but what you brought was a house of cards built on fraud and intimidation. You are fortunate that I'm limited in what I can do from this bench. The criminal courts may not be so restrained." Darren's face went through several colors before settling on white. He didn't speak. He gathered his papers and walked out, his lawyer trailing behind. I never saw him again. The town didn't celebrate with a parade, but something shifted that day. People who'd crossed the street now stopped to shake my hand. The sheriff's office issued a formal statement clearing me of any wrongdoing. The county paper ran a front-page story titled "Widow Vindicated" with a photograph of Elaine and the twins on the porch of the farmhouse. But the real ending happened a week later on a Sunday afternoon. I was out in the pasture, checking a section of fence line that I'd noticed leaning, when Emma and Lily came running across the grass. Mr. Elias, look." Lily held out her hand. In her palm sat the wedding ring, the one Elaine had been polishing, glinting in the sunlight. "Mama said to give this to you. She said you'd know what it meant." I took the ring. It was still warm from her palm. I walked back to the house, my heart pounding, and found Elaine standing on the repaired porch in a blue dress I'd never seen before. "I waited for the man who would stay," she said, her voice trembling only slightly. "And here you are, still here. I'm not asking for promises. I'm just asking if you want to keep being the answer to a prayer I didn't know I was allowed to make." I looked at the ring in my hand. I looked at the gate I'd fixed, still swinging true. I looked at the photograph in the window, and this time I could have sworn the soldier was smiling. Then I took Elaine's hand and slipped the ring back onto her finger where it belonged. "I came to mend a gate," I said. "I didn't know I was stepping into a doorway I'd been walking toward my whole life." She kissed me on the porch, in full view of the pasture and the gate, and whatever shadow might still be watching from the tree line. The twins cheered. Somewhere in the distance, a hinge creaked once and fell silent. I'd spent 15 years building fences to keep the world out. But the gate Elaine called me to fix wasn't meant to keep anything in. It was meant to open. And the moment I stepped through it, I stopped being a man who only knew how to hold things together with wire and wood. I became a man who understood that some gaps can't be filled by concrete alone. Some require a willingness to stay when everything tells you to leave. The farm is different now. The garden blooms, the barn is clean, the porch doesn't sag, and on the mantel next to Thomas's photograph sits the metal box that once held his final message, a reminder that some men build legacies not with deeds and titles but with the quiet, stubborn love that outlasts them. I'm not Thomas, I never will be, but I'm the man he asked for. And every night, when I walk past that gate to close it for the evening, I feel the weight of that trust, not as a burden but as a gift. A fence builder answers calls no one else will. But sometimes the call isn't about a broken latch. Sometimes it's about a family that's been waiting for someone to walk through an open door and decide to stay. It's been 2 years since I hung that gate. The farm has changed in ways I can't fully measure with a level or a post hole digger. The garden Elaine tended with such fierce hope now feeds 5 families in the county, and her stall at the Saturday market has a waiting list. The twins have grown 3 inches each and learned to ride the old pony their father bought them before he deployed. They still whisper to each other on the porch swing, but now the secrets are about school and birthday presents and the new baby brother who arrived last spring, a boy with Thomas's steady eyes and his mother's quiet strength. We named him Thomas Elias. People ask me sometimes if I believe Thomas sent me, if I believe the dreams Elaine had were real visitations, if I believe a dead soldier's prayer can travel across oceans and years and land on a dusty answer like me. I don't have a clean answer for them. I'm a practical man. I believe in concrete and steel and the weight of a properly hung gate, but I also believe that love leaves marks. It leaves letters in hidden floorboards. It leaves children who whisper secrets they shouldn't know. It leaves widows who polish rings they're not ready to wear, and strangers who feel an inexplicable pull toward a gravel road that GPS can't find. Whether Thomas was watching from beyond or his careful planning simply reached forward through time, I can't say. What I can say is this: we are not as alone as we think. Somewhere, somehow, the people who loved us have already set things in motion. They've planted clues, opened doors, mended hinges we haven't yet found. And when the right moment comes, all we have to do is walk through. I came to mend a widow's gate. I found a family that had been waiting for someone who wouldn't run. And if that's not proof of something bigger than a fence builder's best intentions, I don't know what is. This is one of those stories you can't make up. If you have your own story, a moment when the universe seemed to place you exactly where you were needed, we want to hear it. Share it in the comments below, and subscribe for more true-life documentaries that prove the most powerful forces in the world are still love, loss, and the quiet courage to stay.